So thanks for joining us, everyone. My name is Ben Lee. I work with Shared Intelligence, and I've been involved in network leadership over the past few years, including with the Health Foundation. And I'm sat here with Sophie Edwards, who's also been advising networks in some same ways as me and some other ways too. Hi, Sophie.
Hi, Ben. So yeah, I've also been working with the Health Foundation. We use background support networks program. I'm sure there's been lots of discussion about that today. And I also work with other networks outside health, including education. So networks is a real area of passion of mine. And we know the impact story has been one of the areas that challenged networks perhaps most over the last few years. So great to hear from everybody else about the work they're doing in this area.
Okay, thanks, Sophie. And so I've just flipped over to, I thought we were going to start at 5:05, so I'm going to transpose it forward to 5:45. But we're basically going to cover a few things between now and 6:30. We're going to just share a bit of our own perspective on network effectiveness and network impact and some of the differences. We're going to give some examples of stories, using stories to show impact. We're going to go through something called the maturity model, which is on the diagnostic section of the toolkit. And then we're going to have, hopefully, enough time for a bit of a discussion about different approaches to trying to show what impact networks are having. So I know that we're using the chat box for the workout, so we'll be watching the chat box. If there's anything that anybody wants to raise as a question, put it in the chat box and we'll either come to it straight away or try and find a moment when we can. When we get to the walkthrough of the maturity model, what I'm hoping is that one person on the WebEx might be willing to be a guinea pig and use the network that they're involved in as a test. I'll ask some questions about where the network is, and if one person could volunteer to talk about their network, just to bring us to life a bit, that'd be great. So if anybody wants to volunteer now, that's good, or you can leave it 10 minutes and we'll see whether anyone gets forward. Otherwise, we'll have to make it up and do a hypothetical. So I'm going to just flick to the first section, and I'm going to ask Sophie to cover off this first bit, which is just making a difference. And there's kind of two ideas we've got of how to show the difference. One is kind of how we're operating, but then the bigger question of making an impact. So Sophie.
Thanks. So just really briefly here, one of the things that we know from working with networks is that showing how you're making an impact is actually quite a vexed question. Lots of people are trying to demonstrate impact or trying to find ways of measuring impact. It's not easy, so we'll talk about shortly some ways you might think about it. But one of the alternatives that we have, proxy if you like in the first instance, is looking at how well you're operating as a network. And those of you who've been on the NHS IQ toolkit may have come across a series of diagnostic models that you can go through that invite you to really think at whatever stage you are as a network, how are you running as a network? How effective are you? Are you engaging people in the right way? Do you know critically what you're there for? And we start with the question of what we're there for, because it's only when you know what you want to achieve that you can tell later whether or not you've achieved it. So we're going to come back to the maturity model and this diagnostic approach shortly. But we also want to start by thinking about this question of, are you actually making an impact? As we said, much harder question, one that taxed a lot of network leaders. What I wanted to share with you was a couple of examples from network leaders that we've spoken to, and some of those would be happy to hear from you if you've got specific questions. So one of those, do you want to go on to the next slide?
Yeah.
Is around, so the next particular network that we've heard from recently, which we thought was an interesting story to tell, is the Norfolk and Suffolk Dementia Alliance. I know they're part of the the new leadership development programme that NHSIQ is running. Talking to Willie Cruikshank, who runs that network, he had some really interesting thoughts about impacts that we thought we'd just share with you, and perhaps hear your own thoughts at the end of that. One of the things he talked about was the importance of knowing purpose, knowing what you want to do, and setting yourself some goals for the network, but staging those goals and being realistic. So reaching for the stars right from the start and then feeling that you're not achieving it puts everybody off, especially within networks. But it may be that in the first instance, it's simply enough to be doing more cross-team working. So set your goals, be realistic, and make sure the early goals that you report back on are straightforward ones that you've got a good chance of hitting. He also talked about how it's quite hard, as we know, to show causality of impacts with networks. Network leaders are often quite shy about taking credit for impact. You're worried about treading on the toes of your stakeholders and members. Is it really fair that the network says that they've done this? That's a line you're always going to have to manage as a network leader. But what Willie recommended doing, and he's done himself successfully, is to choose an initiative that you can own, something that you can take credit for as a network, and then be quite rigorous about it, evaluate it. There are tools that you can do that. He used a Kirkpatrick analysis. There are others, and again, Willie'd be happy to hear from people who would like to know more about that. So choose the initiative that you can own, and then stick with that, evaluate it, and report back. He also pointed out, and something we've seen from lots of other network leaders, is that you can have a lot of different people in one organisation who are part of your network. Don't assume that they know about each other, that they know that they're all involved. They may not have a sense of the actual impact it's having across the organisation or the service that's being provided. And part of the role of a network leader is joining those dots and feeding that back to the organisation, helping them understand, look, these are the different people in your organisation who are involved, and you can see the impact, you can see the sum of the parts, if you like, that way. And a really important point, not just from Willie, but from other network leaders that we've spoken to, in these really constrained times, and where operating pressures are mounting, it's increasingly challenging to demonstrate to managers and sponsors, budget holders, if you like, that networking has a real value. So you have to think about the value that you're adding for sponsors as well as your members, and make sure you're reporting that back to those sponsors, to the budget holders, to your members, sponsors and managers, to your members, and really paying attention to who the people who have to give permission to release time or resources for your network pays dividends in keeping people on board. So that's some of the practical things that Willie and other network leaders have recommended you think about in terms of how you report on impact. I'm going to pause it there and just see if there are any questions or thoughts, or perhaps people have from their own networks and experience any things to share there.
Okay, if anybody's got any thoughts, just pop them into the text box. We won't drag it out indefinitely.
No.
Give people time to talk, to type. Okay, shall we move on?
Do you want to talk now about the telling impact stories, some of the ideas around videos and so on?
Yeah, okay. So just kind of following on from the example that Sophie just gave, another thing that we are becoming quite interested in, and I've used in networks, especially with community-based networks, not actually in healthcare, is capturing stories on video, short video, because we've all got most of us got high definition video cameras in our pockets, and the cost of producing good quality video has gone right down. Sophie's got some examples as well. But capturing stories of impact using video in very, very kind of accessible ways on an iPhone or kind of a very cheap camcorder is something we've done with community groups involved in a lottery program called Big Local. Some of you might have come across that. And not only is it quick and cheap to do, but it also, for trying to convey kind of salient messages quickly, it is also, the form of the video can be just 2 or 3 minutes. So it's not just that it takes a lot less time to to produce, say 20 minutes filming something and then maybe a few minutes editing it, versus a day writing a research report, but it's also much quicker and simpler to pass on. Doesn't take away from doing kind of detailed research, but if you're just trying to get a narrative about impact out very quickly, then short video and short audio as well is a very, very useful tool. And there are some examples within healthcare of stories, and there's a movement around what's called digital storytelling, which has, I'm just going to show you if I can, there's a movement around digital storytelling, which is, here we go, which has been used by a number of healthcare teams. It comes from the United States, where there's something called a digital storytelling center, but this is really a very structured way of capturing stories, usually when you've got a group of people together in a room and you've only got them together for a fixed period of time, and you want to capture something then and there. I'm not going to go into that in any more detail now, but if any of you, if that sounds interesting to anyone, then look up digital storytelling, look up some of the healthcare applications of it in the UK, and take a look at the Digital Storytelling Centre in the US. They also do free webinars. There's one coming up on the 1st of February where you can get a quick introduction to people involved in it, and also introduction to the techniques. I'm just going to come back now to our slides. Shall we go on to the maturity model? Yeah,
I just wanted, before we really interested, curious to know of the network leaders who are on the call, how many of you are already trying in some way to capture any impact? If you are, I don't know if you've got to use the chat or just to indicate whether just you're actually trying to focus on this at the moment. So if you've got Danielle, that's
okay. Yes, so one person says, yes, I am. M. Patterson, can you share a tiny bit more? I know it's hard to listen and type in a time box. The question was, are any of you already looking at ways to demonstrate impact, capture impact of your networks? So, Georgina is saying, yeah, we're hearing that most network leaders are grappling to know where to start with impact capture.
Okay. That's maybe one to come back under the maturity model when we get to that.
Okay, should we go to that now?
Oh, hang on, we've got one from somebody else. We've created a questionnaire.
Oh, okay, all right.
Sent out to our network. Now it's a year old.
Oh, everybody types at the same pace. It's coming in at once. Like a number 8 bus. Okay, so Laura Murray, we created a questionnaire which has been sent around to our network. Now it's a year old. Alison, we're in National Network Management Service, Scotland, more so with clinicians and more so collecting data impact from clinicians and from patients, focusing Stern. Karen Taylor, I want to, but really struggling as it's difficult to identify the impact. Laura Murray, we're going to be evaluating further this time next year. Okay, I'm talking about also use and impact for local government. Okay.
I'm interested to hear, I don't know whether there's a forum, Liz or Georgie, for people to share their resources coming out of this call. Or if people are willing to share things like their questionnaires, they might be useful resources for the people to see. Is there that capacity, Georgie?
Hi, Sophie. Yeah.
Hi, Georgie.
Hi, Sophie. Yeah, that'd be great. If anyone sends any case studies or any resources, we'll post them all up on the resources page, which there's a link to on the bottom of the slide. And we'll disseminate them through the system as well, so we'll try and build that body of evidence with permissions from people.
Great. I'm just looking at Emma Hogg's comments. I've repeatedly asked members what they've done with the work of the network locally and what changes made, and it's a bit like pulling teeth. I think many network leaders would recognise that sentiment, Emma. I think that's an area, in my experience, where to Ben's point about using things like video, vox pops, even when you bring people together for your face-to-face events, taking a bit of time at those events with a video phone, I sound like I'm from the 90s, you know what I mean, with an iPhone, to just capture those stories as vox pops. Increasingly, that's a great way to capture, and it's something you can put on websites. The challenge can often be when we try and get it really codified and make it into big exercise and trying to write vignettes and case studies and people switch off from that. But it's very easy in a face-to-face setting to just grab your phone and ask people that question and get some spontaneous response. Anecdotal is still valuable.
Okay, shall we go on to the maturity model? Now, I still haven't seen anybody actually volunteer to talk about their actual network. I know it's a slightly exposing thing to do, but is anybody willing to, even if they kind of, you know, soft focus on some of the detail, but at least enable us to use a real network as something to talk about? Okay, well, there's one person who says they've got experience in using the maturity model. Okay, so Lara Murray, I don't have a microphone, but I can share. So, Lara, if you can type quick enough. Can you do this by type, basically? Just type yes if you can and no if you can't. I'll try. Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Lara, right, you need to get ready to type really fast. You don't have to type a lot, but just type short words very quickly. Okay, I'm going to share my screen and show the maturity model. Let's see if this actually works. Fantastic. Okay, so this is a very, very, very detailed document. It looks quite horrible, actually, when you try and see it all on one screen, but we're not going to ask you to read all of this. This is on the network toolkit. It's the bit that, if you click on network diagnostics, that you'll see. And it basically is a self-assessment tool. It divides, actually, Sophie, do you want to just talk about how it was, briefly kind of summarise how this came about? Because you were more involved in making it than me, and I'll try.
Okay. If you go to this part of the NHS toolkit, you'll come across a series of diagnostic tools. You've got a core questionnaire, a network health survey, and the maturity matrix. And the maturity matrix was developed by a bit of a guru in knowledge management, Chris Collison, for the project. And what it allows you to do is to self-assess across a whole series of dimensions how well you're doing as a network. And Ben will talk about it in more detail. And there's some really good instructions on the website with Becky will be talking about how to use it. But the essence of it is it's self-assessment and it's a conversation starter. You do this in a group with your network fellow leaders or a group of your members to get a sense of where you think you are as a network. What it's looking to explore is how well you're running as a network. It's not answering what impact you're having. But to go back to some of the comments that were there from people, we say that knowing what you want to do at the outset is so important in helping you start the sometimes difficult journey of assessing whether you're actually doing it. If you don't know what your purpose and direction, which is the first column on this, is, then it's much harder to demonstrate to people what it is that you're doing.
Okay, thanks for that. So Lara Murray is going to try and answer some of these questions in relation to her actual network. Lara, while I'm just explaining next step, can you just type in, just give other participants a little bit of an idea of what networks you're going to be talking about? And I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom so I can do that. So we're just going to take a couple of the columns. We're going to take the purpose and direction column and the impact and value, because they kind of are the punchlines really of this. So Lara, okay, if you're ready, we're going to take the purpose and direction column. So basically, there's 5 statements. The first statement is, and these kind of in ascending order of maturity. Statement 1 is, Laura's explained she's from the Self-Management Network in Scotland, sharing learning about self-management of long-term conditions. Thank you, Laura. The first statement says, Laura, would you describe your network in terms of purpose and direction as having no sense of goals or plans, it's all about the here and now, focus isn't clear, it goes off topic, or, getting slightly more mature, the network scope is loosely defined, some ways of working are emerging, there are some short-term plans, but they're not widely shared. Ramping up a bit more. Wait till I get to the fifth one, Laura, before you answer. The network has got an agreed charter, clearly stating its purpose, scope and ways of working. Most members have got a good understanding of purpose. There's a plan for developing that goes as far as the next year. Or, all members are clear about the purpose of the network, its role in convening, amplifying and advocacy. Deliverables are well known. The charter, the agreed charter, is accessible and shared with all members. Or, this might be the kind of the never reached nirvana. The network continually reviews its strategic focus. It spawns additional groups to cover up stuff. Members share the same ambition. They all fully buy into the strategy and plan. External drivers, when things happen in the outside world, the network internalises it and understands it and acts accordingly. So, Laura. Three. Okay. The network has an agreed charter, clearly stating its purpose. Okay. So, bear with us, Laura. I'm now going to go, and this is just really a demonstration of the kinds of ways that you could use it. So clearly, we're looking at something here which can be used in a group setting. You could, I guess, use this as the basis of a questionnaire or survey, but I think it probably works a little better when there's some real-time interaction, even if one person's texting rather than talking. So we're going to look at the seventh out of the eight kind of dimension, impact and value. So, Laura, if you're ready again, okay, level one, impact isn't really discussed, and it's just comfortable to belong to the club. Level two, some members can point to examples of value and impact, but nobody's got the big picture. Some success stories may be captured, but in an ad hoc way. Number three, the network members have shared understanding of the value that they add. They have a shared understanding of the value they add. Some senior people acknowledge this. There are some examples which clearly demonstrate impact. Number four, the network captures shared success stories of benefits and impact. Stories to celebrate and communicate to different audiences. Stakeholders understand the impact the network is having. Or five, the network is acknowledged by members and stakeholders alike for its impact. People are proud of their accomplishments. It reviews impact in order to understand and repeat successes. Specific external stakeholders are targeted with impact stories. Okay, Laura, can I ask you which you are? Four. Okay, so slightly, so actually higher on impact than on purpose and direction, which I think, given the context and discussions of this call, I think is actually really impressive. I'd almost have expected people to be stronger on purpose and some of the other things than on actually having impact and value. So I think that's a really, really interesting finding.
Before we move off that, Laura, I'd just be curious if you can type fast enough. Sorry to put you under the pressure. Be really interested to know how you are capturing stories through your network. What tools are you using? How are you doing that?
Laura might have to use abbreviations and emoticons to convey this quickly.
Legitimate use of emoticons is allowed.
Wow, very good. We work closely with our members to co-produce the network. Okay, for the purpose of being defined to go along. Well, that is...
I think that's a really interesting statement and a reminder to us that one of the things about networks, and it is always a balancing act between holding in mind you need to have enough shared purpose and direction to be pulling in the same direction. But networks are these wonderful, fast-changing things. And if you are adding value as you go along, then that's great. So I'm just hearing here stories and real-life experience key to sharing learning. That's absolutely key to what we do.
Okay. Thanks so much, Laura. Everybody should give a virtual round of applause, not just for being so honest and quick thinking, but also for interacting with that in a quite challenging way.
We're showcasing member stories at live events, blogs and case studies. Laura, if you've got a website or anything that you can put up here, people might be interested to just see how you're doing it, if you've got anything on a website. Oh, hang on, question from Tanya Eva. How long has Lara's network been going to reach this level? Suspense is rising. It's over a year.
It's over a year. Well, okay, I think I'll just kind of recap in a minute kind of how you've used the maturity model. But from my perspective, that what Lara has described is actually a really, really encouraging kind of pen portrait there. So a network which is just over a year old, just a bit more than 12 months old. In fact, you've got a website, that's a good thing, but the fact that you're co-producing kind of that personal vision and how we tell the story with members, and that, you know, obviously we can't get into all the detail, but that you've actually assessed your impact and value higher than your personal direction, just shows that, at least from your perspective, the network really is doing something. It's getting beyond talking and is actually having some kind of impact on the things that network members care about. So that, I think if you were talking about this within a group, that kind of discussion hopefully would be a springboard for two things. One, talking about where we are as a network, as a kind of internally focused developmental discussion, but also giving more texture to the way that you could articulate telling the story of the network beyond. So, I mean, just knowing these few tiny scraps of information, I think it would, if I had a network that was, and felt about it the way that Lara feels about her network, I would love to be able to tell people, look, we're 1 year in, obviously we've got some big ambitions and a long way to go, but we're already feeling like we've got some impact in here in some of the ways. I think that the fact that we co-produce what we do may be a contributing factor. It already gives much more texture to the way in which you can talk about the effectiveness of your network. So thank you for helping us illustrate that. So is there anything you want to say about
I just wanted to add, and this also chimes with the conversation I had with Willie. I think because impact capturing can be hard, and because we get this demand from some audiences that they want to see almost an RCT approach to how networks work, we can be a little bit too shy about what our networks are doing. And I guess what I'm struck by from Lara's example, and from some of the others I've heard as well, is to feel that confidence and boldness to talk up what you're doing. The only people who are going to sell the impact of the network are you, who are in it and running it, and to really not fight shy of capturing and talking about what you have and whatever it is. Don't hide it under a bushel. I'm really struck by that from Lara's example, just the confidence with which you're talking about your work, which I think is half the battle with networks. Would you say so?
I think that is, yeah. It's the kind of, yeah, I think that there's always a kind of, in the network that I've been lucky enough to work with, there is always a bit of an asymmetry between the kind of the confidence with which the confidence people have in what they're doing, but then the confidence they have that other people can recognise what they're doing. And the gap is in kind of having a way of talking about what we're doing that doesn't just resonate and ring true for those who are involved, but actually give some kind of hook or handle for those who are not involved. And actually, and Sophie and I were talking earlier about who you collect impact stories from, and I think you can collect impact stories, or you can just talk about what difference are we making with members of the network, and you get one perspective. But the harder thing is to collect similar stories, not just from the people in your network, but from the people who, in a way, allow the network to operate, but aren't in it themselves. So, for instance, it could be line managers, network members. It could be funders. And having those two different perspectives, I think, is really important. It's actually quite hard to do. Okay. I'm going to quick share that and ask whether we've left about 12 or 13 minutes at the end to see whether anybody else wants to share any other perspectives, either ideas that have come to mind or questions that have been raised by what we've said, or other examples of ways of capturing impact that people have come across. Has anybody got any questions or reactions?
Oh, so from Karen Taylor, this would be good to use our network. That's the maturity model, I'm guessing, Karen. Yes, the maturity matrix is in that network toolkit, and it's everything you need to use it for a group discussion is there. And just to emphasise, and Becky's introduction on the site will say this too, the value of the matrix is really in the conversation that you have around it, both within your leadership group, and then if you choose to take it out to your wider network. I noticed somebody earlier on, Alison, I don't know whether she's still on the line, had used the matrix. I'd be interested to hear from her or anybody else who's tried it, how you found it as a tool. I don't know whether Alison may not be on the line. Not sure, maybe Alison may not still be on the line. Oh, here we go. The Absolutely a network for a government was really helpful and brings the stakeholder teams together well.
Alison, can you give a bit of more of a clue to what kind of network that was? I think it's interesting that Alison raised the point of a review of the network for government. Some resistance.
I have heard that before.
I mean, actually, I think it can help to not use to use the matrix as a script, but not actually show people, because showing a kind of 8x5 grid of text often gets a slightly frosty reaction. But actually, as a script, to ask people a series of questions, it can work better. They never need to know that it looks a little bit ugly. But what Alison said about reviewing networks for government, I think that is, for me, that's a really, really interesting example of where often kind of governments, networks which are set up and where a central government organisation has provided, say, the resources to make it happen, to free up the time, participant time, or for facilitation. Often the people who have authorised and funded that activity to take place are not the people who participate in it. So again, you get this mismatch between people in the network understand very viscerally the benefit that's bringing them, but the people who are paying for it aren't part of the network. They're just kind of signing off the progress reports every 6 months. And you have to get under the skin of what they think the network is doing, which is easier said than done, because sometimes for them it's a project or a program to just make it happen and conclude, and actually it's quite hard to engage them in what do you think this is doing.
I agree with Alison on that. And just thinking back to the conversation I had with Willie, the effort that network leaders put into feeding back to sponsors, to the people who are providing the resource, is almost always well repaid. Even though it's onerous sometimes for the network leaders, it is actually a very valuable way of both the discipline for yourselves of capturing your impact, but also keeping the people who sponsor it online. Hang on, we've got...
Getting stuck at different levels, so I don't want to keep kind of banging on and embarrassing Lara, but I think for a network, for one person involved in the network to see that network as fairly high up the maturity model after a short period of time is incredibly encouraging and positive. And I think often Sophie and I have worked with networks which have been going for a lot longer, and actually they feel as if they've plateaued and aren't actually kind of moving. So they don't feel like they're kind of moving and improving and growing in value. They're kind of, there's nothing bad is happening, but at the same time, there's that sense of stuckness. Sophie, you and I both come across that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is something that we have to keep in mind with networks. They are don't want to say stop-start, but they do ebb and flow. So the membership and the vitality in a network, which is also one of the domains, that may fluctuate over time, and the fact that you've got periods where people are less active doesn't necessarily mean your network is in trouble. It's just that networks as a way of working, people come in and out, they drift in and out, they have different energy flows. And one of the advantages of something like the matrix is that it invites you to prioritise which of these dimensions you want to focus on and put some concerted effort into that. So you might come out with 2 for one of the dimensions, I don't know, you might leadership and facilitation or knowledge capture and reuse, for example, and think, do you know what, that's less important for us right now than getting the right impact and value or really focusing on our sustainability. So a tool like this invites you into a conversation where collectively you can say, this is the priority and we need to put some effort and resource into this particular part of how we run. And then you can do the same exercise again in 6 months or a year's time and see where you've moved to. You can't do it all at once. The networks that try and do that need either an enormous amount of resource or a lot of help.
And they're organic things as well. I mean, I think there's another thing, I mean, like kind of like labouring the point about kind of between funders and participants, but I think sometimes kind of people who have encouraged the network to be created, when they're not necessarily people involved in it, they may see the network as almost like a kind of a mechanistic thing, but it will happen and it will grow and it will just simply get bigger at either a faster or slower rate, but not see it as an organic thing, which actually really might have some flow and might have kind of real burst of development. And then, you know, and then a sort of a quiet period. They're not kind of mechanistic things, they're actually human organic things.
Laura asked a specific question about what happens when you get different scores. And one of the things that Becky suggests on the site is that you actually go for the lowest score in the room. So rather than get into a big debate about whether the person who gives it 4 is right or the person who gives it 2, you kind of go as slow as the slowest member in the group. And that seems to me to be quite a good discipline, because it's the conversation that matters rather than the score ultimately.
Yeah.
Got a question here from Justine Smith. I know that Willie, for example, was very happy to share some of their learning from the Dementia Alliance Network, and he suggested go through Georgie at NHSIQ to get that detail. So he's very happy to receive more questions.
And also, just in terms of this thing about kind of exemplar networks, I mean, in some of the work that was written up, some of which you wrote, Sophie, about the Health Foundation's network programme, I mean, it's clear reading through that report that, you know, that there are quotes from different references to specific networks that are really easily identifiable in there. You can, some of those reports, a reader can go through and find a network which seems to have gone through the same sort of loop as they want to go through, and some of those people in that report, I think you could easily Google and look them up. And is there any more structured way of connecting people from networks in other generations of network programs to people on this programme?
I think that's a really good question.
We've been down this path before.
Yeah, most of those people I think would be really glad to share their learning. What I can do is go back to the Health Foundation and just see where they are about just sharing the details of those networks that were part of it. And it may also be worth those of you who aren't already connected with the Health Foundation in some way to go on and have a look at their site and their resources. They've got a big initiative called Q, which is around quality improvement and is bringing network leaders together. So go onto their site, have a look there and see who's involved in that.
Yes, there are so many networks out there and there must be a lot of great experience. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's sometimes kind of hard to appreciate quite how many networks or things which you would describe as a network are actually out there functioning, groups of people from kind of formal networks to networks which are set up by people kind of outside the normal chain of command. There are actually so many, and it can be actually quite difficult to kind of see at a glance. You know, somebody's always going to say, oh, well, I have just one big directory, but then as soon as you've got the directory, it's going to be out of date. But but it can be difficult to appreciate quite how much networking has kind of has grown throughout the organisation of health of the NHS. And I wonder if there's anything that can be done to kind of, a directory is not the answer, but somehow make visible and surface the true extent of networks that exist now.
I'm just wondering whether Georgie looks like she's put a link up, I think it might be Susanna's report about network leadership, which is a really nice little report, very easy to dip in. That's it. Leading networks.
Susanna Randall.
Susanna Randall, yeah, who was also in the Health Foundations project with us. And that's a really nice little resource. I think the network leaders are named in that, so you can Google them and perhaps get in touch.
Or you might see someone you actually know.
Yes, quite. And then I'm just noticing we're coming right up to the end of the slot, and I just wonder if there's anything that you'd want to say to round up, or whether anybody of our participants might have a final comment or question they want to put before we wrap up.
Okay. Well, let's see if anyone can ask a question quickly. I think for me, this last couple of comments about there must be lots out there has kind of brought it back to another thing about impact, which isn't, as well as thinking about impact and how we tell stories of impact or effectiveness at an individual network level. I mean, one of the things that you and I, Sophie, have talked about often is the way in which, actually, for many people, working through networks and using networks to achieve things that are really important to you has actually become commonplace. And yet, but looking at the kind of the NHS and healthcare system, you wouldn't necessarily always know that, because you've got two things happening at the same time. You've got this kind of proliferation of networks, but at the same time, you know, lots of other activities happening through kind of very formalised ways. And I think if there's one thing this reminds me is that if we look for the networks, I think we'll see far more than you would come across if you weren't looking.
That's a really good point. It's so below the radar, isn't it, networking often? I'm finding ways, quick ways, like the video diaries, video clips, like Laura's example as well, of just capturing quickly, even if it's quick and dirty, your impact stories, getting them into the public domain so that we get things above the radar as well, and we can all recognise the good work that networks do without wishing to be too flip about it at the end of the, do recognise this is an important area and it does take time and effort to do.
Yeah, but you know, there's a lot about perception in any kind of organisational change kind of moment, and sometimes it's as much about the recognition, and the recognition enables the thing to move forward. With actually, you know, you could have lots of networks and not recognise, or people in them not really see that they're quite so much part of the larger movement. Yeah. And that in itself, if you get the recognition that there is a larger movement, you get the visibility, and that in itself, same number of networks with more impact. Okay, unless anybody else punches in a really quick final comment, we're probably going to have to wrap it up.
We are.
So, just thank you everyone. The number of participants actually started at 29, ended up at 30, hasn't dipped down, which means that nobody's actually left it. Everyone stayed on for the whole call, which is amazing.
Thank you.
And we feel very privileged that you heard us out and listened to what we had to say. And I don't know whether Georgie has anything that she needs to say or tell people at the end.
Hi there. So Ben and Sophie, thank you so much. You've been really instrumental in helping to support our work.